In a nutshell, they would claim to be a social club that has rituals. In New Zealand, their Grand Master at the time described it in a newspaper interview as Rotarians with ritual. In a nutshell, they started as a construction team back in about the 1200s in Scotland. That seems to be the origin of it, as best we can tell. They claim they go all the way back to Solomon's Temple, but that's rubbish. There's no evidence of it, and everything says otherwise. They learned how to construct buildings, particularly religious ones, churches and cathedrals and so on. And so, because people in those days were illiterate, they couldn't read and write, in order to determine what their competence level and pay scale was, they developed these little series of handshakes and passwords so that if you moved from one building site to another, you could say the right password and right handshake, and they'd say, right, you're at this level of competence, we can give you this much work and this much pay. So that's partly, I remember an Anglican vicar friend of mine, she was saying to me, do you know how to tell a Freemason in your church? She had a church of about 400. And so I taught her how to do the Masonic handshake. So she immediately knew who all the Masons were in her parish. And she said, then I'm going to be praying for those guys that they wake up to what they're really in, because they're a burden on their families quite apart from the parish. So anyway, right, there's two kinds of Freemasons. There's the operative ones who still work in the construction. They build houses and so on. But there's the speculative ones, and they could be lawyers or politicians or accountants or just anything. In the 16 and 1700s, those people were sort of the landed gentry of Europe, particularly, and Britain in particular. They started to get involved because they had peasants who farmed their farms. They had money and they had too much time on their hands. And so they got involved in groups like the Theosophical Society and others. There were even the Knights Templar and other organizations like that. They were sort of loosely, I would call them, spiritistic. A lot of them were into conspiracy theories. Some of them were involved in plots against the government or so on. And they found it easier to go and join the Masonic lodges. 1717 was the Grand Lodge of England was founded, and from then on, all the Christian bits were removed from what had been before. And so it became a social club, but it also had a lot of rituals, and they've used their power. I would say most of the governments of Africa and Asia have actually had a Masonic control. Latin America, Simón Bolívar, who caused the Spanish to get evicted, and therefore he created Masonic governments for the whole of Latin America. So, you know, and that's well documented if people know where to look for it. It's actually in my book as well. So they've used their political power to control. For example, a former Prime Minister in New Zealand, Keith Holyoake, became the Grand Master for the whole of New Zealand. He had 16 out of 18 cabinet ministers who were Freemasons. So they were there by their handshake, not by their competence.